In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the hem ribbing section of Audrey's cardigan. So the very first step is that it says to switch to a US 9 32-inch circ. Now, of course, if you did a different needle size for your main color because of your own gauge, you would just use whatever the needle size smaller would be than from your main gauge. But in this case, because I did the body on a size 10, then I'm switching to a US 9 for the hem. So to switch needle size, all you have to do, so here's my US 9 right here. All you have to do to switch needles is just go ahead and start working with the new needle. And you'll see once we get to the end of the row that once all of the stitches are off of this US 10, we'll just put it aside. So with the US 9 needle, I'm going to start row 1, which says to first knit 3. So go ahead and knit 3. And then there's an asterisk and it says purl 2, knit 2. Repeat from asterisk to last stitch and then knit 1. So what that means is that first I'm going to purl 2 and then I'm going to knit 2 and then I'm going to repeat that sequence over and over again till I get to 1 stitch before the end of the row. So let's go ahead and do purl 2, knit 2 all the way to 1 stitch before the end of the row. Okay, we've just about made it to the end of the row. I have my final knit 2 and I've knit to 1 stitch before the end, and then it just says to knit 1. So now all of my stitches are now on my US 9. Here's my US 10, and just make sure to put that aside. And then I'll be ready to work row 2. Which is similar, it just starts a little bit different and the order of the sequence is a little bit different. So you're just going to start with a purl 3 and then you will knit 2, purl 2 and repeat from the asterisk all the way to the last stitch and then you'll purl 1. So I'm going to go ahead and work row 2 and then it says to repeat rows 1 and 2 until it measures about 2.5 inches. So there'll be a little bit of ribbing to do before we're ready to bind off. So I'm going to go ahead and just proceed. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to show you the last step, which is binding off in pattern. In this video, I'm going to show you how to bind off the hem in pattern. In this case, our stitch pattern was a rib stitch. So when binding off in pattern, you just need to bind off knitwise when you encounter a knit stitch and purlwise when you encounter a purl stitch. Let me show you how. So our first 3 stitches here are knit stitches, followed by 2 stitches that are purls. As you can see, you can tell that these are knits because they don't have the bumps at the bottom, whereas the purls do. So I know that I'm going to want to bind off these stitches, these first 3 knitwise. So to start a bind off, you always just have to knit the first stitch. Okay. Then because you need 2 stitches on the right needle in order to do a first bind off, I go ahead and knit the second stitch and then I bind off. So I insert the left needle into the front of the further stitch on the right needle and lift it up and over and off the needle. Okay, so it looks like we still have 1 more knit stitch here. So I'll go and knit it. And then bind off. Okay, so now we've encountered the 2 purl stitches. So to bind off purlwise, all you have to do is go ahead and purl the next stitch. So bring the yarn to the front, go ahead and purl it, and then lift the further stitch up and over the other stitch just like you typically would, but you keep the yarn in front. So then the next stitch is also a purl stitch. So I'll go ahead and purl it and then do the bind off. Okay, so then the next 2 stitches are knit stitches. So then I'll move my yarn to the back of the work and bind off both of these stitches knitwise. And then the next 2 stitches are the purl stitches again. So just bring the yarn to the front and bind them off purlwise. So you'll continue in this manner, binding off knitwise and purlwise depending on which stitch that you encounter. So I'm going to go ahead and bind off all the way to the end, and I'll meet you back up once I get to the end. Okay, so I've made it almost to the end of my bind off. I just have my last 3 stitches to bind off. So I will go ahead and bind them all off knitwise. All right. So then once I've bound off my last stitch, just like in a regular bind off, you just have 1 stitch left on the needle. So then what I do is I just sort of bring up the loop just a little bit, put my needles aside, and then I'm going to trim, making sure to leave a nice long tail. And then you're just going to take the tail and you're going to thread it through the loop, just like that. Pull that through and then just cinch it up like that. I'm not as worried. Sometimes that last stitch can look a little bit loose. I'm not that concerned in this case because we're going to be picking up stitches along the edge here. So that's all going to be hidden. So don't worry if your loop at the end even looks a bit bigger than mine. It'll all get hidden in the pickup. So that is how you bind off in pattern.